chain and logistics is considered the lifeblood of the global economy, with globally integrated supply chain models completely disrupted through the COVID-19 pandemic. This will have a long-lasting impact on all fronts: social, political, technical, industrial, and economic. Both regional and global supply chains were fractured in the aftermath of the COVID crisis. Reports suggest almost 75% of companies worldwide experienced disruptions on account of the pandemic. With the COVID-19 related events still unfolding and challenging the demand and supply framework, the industry is expected to undergo a huge transformation. Now, the big question is, should COVID-19 be the black swan event that finally forces many companies and industries to rethink and transform their global supply chain model?
Let me first go across to my colleague Ritu Singh for her take on where things stack up.
The coronavirus crisis has revealed the fragility of the modern supply chains as we know it. The pandemic hit global trade and investment at an unprecedented speed and scale. Governments, businesses, and individuals alike were left struggling to procure even basic products and materials with the sudden lockdowns. Now, industries such as automotive and pharmaceuticals are still feeling the heat of the supply chain disruption because of their dependency on a single source for most of their requirements. Now, these disruptions have led to longer product cycles, increased financial liabilities. Therefore, the urgent need to design smarter and stronger supply chains has been one of the main lessons of this crisis. India's supply chain and logistics sector is one of the largest globally, with a size of almost $215 billion, which is growing at a compounded annual growth rate of 10.5%. A CII study shows that the logistics costs amount to about 8 to 10% of the GDP in countries like US and Europe, 9% in China. The global average is 8%, and compared to that, India's logistic costs amount to almost 14% of the GDP, or almost $400 billion. A comparison with global peers shows that India has a competitiveness gap of $180 billion as of today. Now, India ranked 44 in the World Bank Logistics Performance Index, which was last released in 2018, far behind US at 14 and China at 26. Other South Asian peers such as Thailand and Vietnam, which also have high logistics costs, fared slightly better than India on this index, despite now, because of the size and criticality to economic growth. The problem is that India's supply chain is still marred by many barriers. For instance, India's logistics modal mix is unbalanced and heavily skewed towards transportation by road, which, as you can see, is not exactly cost efficient. India's rail and sea networks, which are actually more cost efficient, remain highly underutilized. Now, indirect logistics costs in India are also 4 times the average of those in developed countries, and the main reason is excessive layers in distribution channels and inventory mismanagement. India also has the second largest road network globally, yet highways account for less than 2.7% of the total network, which puts a severe strain on the highway network, which carries about 40% of the total road traffic. Now, India also has one of the largest rail networks in the world, but again, the average speed of freight trains in India is about 24 to 25 kilometers per hour, compared to about 38 to 40 kilometers per hour in US and China. Now, India also has a shortage of warehousing space, also the slow adoption of supply chain technology such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, and IoT, that also remains a major shortcoming. Therefore, the current crisis is nothing but an opportunity to reset a system that has relied on outdated processes, and creating a smart and nimble supply chain is the key to building a global trade and investment network which is capable of weathering any future storms.
Hello and welcome to The Making with me, Shereen Bhan. Joining me today on this special conversation, Shashi Kiran Shetty, the founder and chairman of All Cargo Logistics, Rajat Verma, the managing director and head of commercial banking at HSBC India, to talk about India's supply chain and logistics reset. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the show. Mr. Shetty, let me start by asking you, the past year has been a trying one for just about every sector and every industry. The supply chain side, albeit has seen disruptions, but we've managed pretty effectively to ensure that there hasn't been any significant dropout of stock outages. What has been the biggest lesson, the biggest learning from what we've seen in the past year?
I would like to begin with saluting our COVID warriors, the frontline workers of our group, and also in the logistic industry in its entirety, for being there and working extremely hard, taking all the possible risk in evacuating the merchandise from the port and to the hinterland and vice versa. and also moving the cargo domestically to make sure that all the necessary supplies are made available to the consumers, to the factories, and to the common man in the middle of the crisis. It was not an easy job to begin with, right? And the most importantly, what lessons we learned is obviously something where it is very unique that in crisis, how quickly people can come together and combine their forces as one and fight a crisis for the benefit of the industry, the organization, and for the well-being of the nation and the world at large. Uh, and the second most important thing is, automatically one always looks in the crisis to see how your organization can become far more efficient and what is the opportunity that the crisis brings for you as an organization. And that is something that was really heartwarming for us as a group, that we came together and fought as one individual team and made sure that a lot of the unnecessary expenses, additional costs, many of those things we've been able to tighten our belt a lot. And it was not easy because we run a global operation spread across 65, 70 countries. And what we did is we brought in our management team and had a daily calls, almost daily call, to see where and how we can be fighting the crisis and make the organization sustainable and strong, and how we can serve our customers in these trying times.
Well, that's good to hear. And you're absolutely right. It has required a lot of Zoom calls, conference calls, and a lot of coming together to be able to operate through this pandemic. But Rajat, to the point that was being made there by Mr. Shetty on changes that have happened on the back end, whether it is more digitization, it is automation, that has in fact benefited the industry from a long-term perspective. So, necessity may have been the mother of invention in the short term, but it's actually likely to make this industry a lot more efficient in the long term. How do you read the changes that have taken place?
I think, Shereen, very fundamental changes have taken place through COVID, and you should never waste a good crisis. And the logistics industry is a great example of that. Let me first begin by agreeing with Mr. Shetty that the frontline workers in logistics and other sectors, including my own banking, are really to be congratulated, and very thankful to all of them. To this point around technology, I think the number of, if I can relate as an analogy, the number of skeptics we had in banking, for instance, who were not willing to take on the use of internet banking or various technologies, they are all almost entirely converted. The same thing applies to every industry that I can think of. And when I think of logistics, I think this is one industry where when I read case studies of how the US rail system has worked, or how it's worked in, let's say, the Korean market, etc., the use of, or even case studies of Indian companies, the use of internet, IoT, of robotics, etc., becomes so significant, because this is one industry where the roadblocks cannot be understood and cannot be sorted until you have data behind it, and until you have, so to use very simplistic examples, you have a good moving from point A to point B. You need sensors on the way, not just for the goods, but to see whether your truck is working efficiently, whether your fuel consumption is correct, whether the air pressure in your tire is correct, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a huge level of detail and data, which clearly anecdote, you can't work on the basis of anecdotes and human intuition. You need technology and data. So I think my sense is that the skepticism that was there in supply chains of many companies is now going to be a thing of the past. And logistics, which was kind of, if you were a CEO of a manufacturing or a brand-based company and you were focusing on your brand and your sales and I think logistics is going to be back in fashion.
Mr. Shetty, I want to understand from you, it's not just COVID, but COVID-related, the second order or third order impact has been quite significant as well. We've seen container shortages, which have led to disruptions as far as the global supply chain is concerned. Of course, let's not even talk about what happened with that other black swan event, which is at the Suez Canal. But, Take me through what have been the big pressure points, the big pain points, and whether you've started to see, at least as far as container shortages, etc., things return to some degree of normalcy.
We did not allow any congestion in any of the Indian ports during the crisis. Thankfully, because we had large outlying areas of the port where we could move containers, and which are called as container freight stations, they moved the containers in the middle of the crisis, and even after that, kept on moving containers out of the port and kept it in the container freight stations, so that the containers come there and await for clearances. In the process, the ships could continue to come and discharge their containers and move out. Right. Of course, there was some delay for the delivery of cargo from the port, from the CFS to the factories, which is because of the lockdown. Right. So, barring that, the ports never were congested. The rail system was working beautifully, and some containers did get delayed at the CFSs and the ICDs. Other than that, things are quite normal as far as the supply chain in India is concerned. The export market also grew substantially in the last few quarters, so we've been able to also support the India's export. Now, as regard to the Suez Canal, yes, this is something which happened at a very, very wrong time, because container shortage was just about easing out, and the freight rates were just about coming down, and the crisis happened again, and that is going to put again a pressure on the container shortage, and the freight rates are likely to go up. Interestingly, and a little unfortunately, India is on the wrong side of Suez, right? So, this will now make more and more companies to think about moving their supply chains closer to their consumption areas. That is the Europe and the United States and North America. Probably they would like to have more supply chain moving closer to them. But my question to all, or suggestion to all the manufacturing companies is, to set up a factory versus setting up your large, well laid out warehouses where you can store in inventory, both raw material and finished goods, so that instead of making them as just in time, give lead time of 15 days and do your economics on the basis of what is it worthwhile having another factory close to your geography, or is it good to hold 15 days additional inventory for any kind of unfortunate events like the Suez Canal blockage?
How much has it gotten easier? For instance, the World Bank Ease of Doing Business ranking does look at things like customs clearances and so on and so forth. On the ground, actually, how much easier has it become to be able to just, conduct your business without the kind of red tape that you've had to deal with previously?
I'll give you one
In
simple...
permissions, how many do you now need?
Yeah, I'll give you one simple data point. That is, in the past, the containers used to take, the import containers used to take anywhere between 12 to 14 days, about 6 or 7 years ago, which has now come down to about 2 days.
Okay.
So that's quite a remarkable drop in the dwell time of the containers staying, awaiting clearance. So which has happened mainly because the Prime Minister's initiative to have containers to be allowed to be removed out of the port directly, although they don't go directly to the consumers' warehouses, but to the factories, but they come to the CFSs. But from the CFSs, they get cleared very quickly because all the filing is done in advance. The clearances are given online. There are many provisions which have come about in the last few years, which has really made things much more easier.
Well, that's good to hear. From 12 to 14 days, you're saying that the time taken for clearance is down to about 2 days now. But Rajat, back again to the larger point that you were making, and that Mr. Shetty sort of added his inputs to as well, on being able to address the infrastructure side of the piece to ensure that India is a beneficiary of this China +1 or China +2 strategy. He was talking about the dedicated freight corridor and so on and so forth. Once again, going back to viability, going back again to the kind of investments required on the infrastructure side of it. We've now got a DFI being operationalized soon enough. How are you seeing all of those factors playing a role in continuing to build out the momentum on the logistics side?
Shireen, I think there would be no disagreement to say that our capability as a manufacturing hub is very closely linked with our ease of doing business around logistics as well, amongst other things. And my own sense is that there's a massive amount of infrastructure planned. If we could throw numbers of 5 trillion, etc., in a certain period of time. But the point is that there is still a lot of action that can be done in pockets like the dedicated freight corridor, like moving through more through rails, etc., which doesn't take, you can tackle parts of the problem. We don't have to tackle all the problems because the reality is that we do not have the capital to tackle all the problems at the same time. We do not have the 5 trillion ready to be made available. But logistics is absolutely fundamental. Supply chain logistics is absolutely fundamental to our competitiveness. You will never see a foreign company saying we don't have talent in India, we don't have the brains, we don't have the universities, we don't have the manufacturing skills, we don't have the scientists. They're never going to say that. But they will say what I just mentioned, which is around the logistics. So it is absolutely linked, and maybe some part of it is perception and it's improved. I think there's definite improvement. And hearing Mr. Shetty, I'm also really happy. But clearly, perception does become reality.
The kind of distress that some players may be facing, is this an opportunity that would propel you, push you to do more M&A?
Yeah, Shireen, we also don't have unlimited capital, right? We have limitation there. And we always, of course, look at, right fits and at the right size and the right value, right? What we can absorb. And we normally are a slightly debt-averse company. We don't like to leverage too much. So you never know. Let's see where it takes us, what opportunities come by. Yeah. We're examining a bunch of them. Yeah.
You are examining a bunch of them. Do you believe that you're on the cusp of being able to close anything anytime soon, or is that still going to take a while?
No, it will take a while. It will take a while. Yeah, it's all initial ones. Yeah. We're just about digesting Gati, just a year now, and that was a big animal. It was in all sorts of trouble when we acquired it, yes. And now the company is already very healthy and moving on the right track.
Okay, so absorbing a big animal, but appetite for more is the word coming in from Mr. Shetty. Rajat, before we close, the playbook going forward, what will you have your eye on?
Well, certainly the new policy or the new regulatory governance framework around the country, I think that could be a game changer. I think everything that Mr. Shetty has said around warehousing and the development of logistics parks and so on, certainly that could be quite critical as well. So, I mean, the way that I look at it in this area, I think we have so much upside in this area. It's certainly something to watch out for.
Certainly something to watch out for. Rajat, Mr. Shetty, we wish you the very best of luck. Many thanks for joining us here on The Making to take us through what the road ahead looks like for the logistics and supply chain business in India as well as internationally going forward. Always a pleasure. Appreciate your time.
I have a last point to make, Shireen. Finally,
please go ahead.
We are so thankful that the government has finally recognized to support the garment and textile industry in the country, which is one of the biggest job creator. And also, if you look at the history of any company, right from UK to China to Thailand to Bangladesh, they all thrive on manufacturing of garments and textiles. And then on the base of that manufacturing, then they build their other manufacturing. India is, of course, already a large manufacturer, as we all know. But I think we should somehow bring back our garment and textile manufacturing and many other things what we can do. And with the 5G technology coming in, I think Indian industries should think about investing a lot in the area of research and development. And the government should really come up with some kind of a subsidy to support those kind of initiatives of manufacturing in India.
Mr. Shetty, I'm glad you say that. But textiles was the one which surprised me most in the PLI, in the sense that I didn't expect it to be there amongst the other sectors, which actually have different themes. But that's the one that probably makes a whole lot of sense for a country like India. Absolutely, because of the job creation, because of the effects and all of that stuff. Yeah.
And
but
I became the
that
chairman of.
since we're addressing the PLI issue, Mr. Shetty, and this is the feedback that's coming in from many players at this point in time, that while it's a step in the right direction, the question is it enough to be able to draw away business from countries that have already emerged as significant, with significant advantages? For instance, you talked about textile. You've already seen Bangladesh, Vietnam taking share away from India. So do you believe that the scheme as is will ensure that we bring back business?
India, I think the Indian government also should sometimes think about a venture capitalist. Okay, so you invest money, lose money for 5 years, 10 years, help company to build scale, establish yourself as a big player in the market, and then reap the benefits. And not only textile and garments, there could be many other industries where if the government, makes those investments, like how China did it. What China did, gave away so much of subsidies and allowed their companies to build large scales and become so competitive. It's very difficult for anybody to really compete with them, right? There are multiple examples of that. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If we study some case studies that we have around us in Asia, we could replicate those and make India the manufacturing base. And this is the time for us to, really put our focus and energy on creating manufacturing, creating jobs for the young Indian population. We can be the global workforce, as you know, and we need to really educate our young people to become very qualified workforce for the world, not just for factories, also for many other services, as we already do it so well. And, so those kind of things, I think we need to really think very hard. And PLI can go into IT companies also, for example. Right?
Yeah. Well, we so far not on the list. 13 sectors have been identified, mobile phone manufacturing and so on and so forth are the schemes which have already been announced by the government. We're of course awaiting the big one, which is for the auto sector. That is where the scheme has yet to be notified. Mr. Shetty, Rajat, always a pleasure. Appreciate you joining us here on The Making. Thanks very much for your time. We wish you both the very best of luck.
Thank you. All the best. Rajat,
Thank you,
thank you very
Shereen. Thank you,
much.
Mr. Shetty.
Pleasure to see you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Shetty. Good to see you.
Bye-bye. Bye,
So
Shereen.
with that, it is time for us to wrap things up on The Making. From all of us here, goodbye. Many thanks for watching.